Coming up on Network Africa, Sudan's RSF accuses regular army of bombing old presidential palace. The U.S. says it committed to reinstating civilian democracy in Sudan. Plus, powerful Port Sudan tribe holds rally in support of regular Sudanese army. Hello and welcome to Network Africa on Channels Television. I'm Anne Nwawado. Let's start in Sudan, where the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, has accused the Sudanese armed forces of launching airstrikes against the country's old presidential palace in the capital, Khartoum. The group added that it would reply decisively. Residents of that city reported heavy bombing on the area, but the army has denied that the RSF's claims. The old Republican Palace is located along the Blue Nile River near the current premises that were inaugurated in January 2015. The two warring parties have been holding peace talks in Saudi Arabia, but there is little sign of progress. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that the United States will not give up on the goal of putting Sudan back on track to civilian democratic governance, adding that Washington is working in talks in Jeddah to extend the ceasefire and get agreement on the provision of humanitarian aid. Talks began on Saturday between the Army and the RSF in the Saudi Red Sea city of Jeddah. Residents of Sudan's capital reported airstrikes overnight and sporadic gun battles on Tuesday amid what they are saying was a surge in looting with no sign of progress in the ceasefire talks taking place in Saudi Arabia.
We continue to engage directly with Sudanese civilian leaders, with Sudanese civil society, with the goal of putting their nation back on the track to civilian democratic governance. That's the goal that we share and the goal that we will not give up on. Together now, we are pressing the warring parties in Sudan to put down their guns and allow life-saving aid to reach the Sudanese people. We have diplomats from the United States and Saudi Arabia deeply engaged in talks in Jeddah, working in close consultation with counterparts from the UK, the United Arab Emirates, the African Union, and other multilateral partners. The collective aim that we have is to lay the foundation for further negotiations between the parties that we hope can lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities. But in the first instance, we're working in Jeddah to extend the ceasefire and get agreement on the provision of humanitarian assistance to the people of Sudan. Today, I also had the chance to thank James for the United Kingdom's crucial cooperation in getting citizens of both of our countries out of Sudan. These joint efforts allowed UK aircraft to evacuate more than 2,000 people, including US citizens, from dangerous and unpredictable conditions. And they were indispensable to the evacuation of hundreds of additional US citizens through Port Sudan. All told, we supported the evacuation of more than 1,300 Americans from Sudan in collaboration with our partners.
Meanwhile, a Saudi plane carrying approximately 20 tons of food, medicine and shelter supplies landed in Port Sudan late yesterday, even as the country falls further into war that has been on for 3 weeks now. Fighting in Sudan's capital escalated this morning with fierce clashes and airstrikes as delegations of rival military factions continue talks in Saudi Arabia, which is aimed at securing a ceasefire and humanitarian relief. Residents reported battles in several neighborhoods in Khartoum between the army and the RSF and heavy gunfire in the northern part of Udmoran and the east of Bahri, two adjacent cities separated from Khartoum by the Nile River. In the meantime, members of the Bedouin tribe, which has the past mobilized in support of the army, is now closing off Port Sudan, staged demonstration in the Sudanese city, pledging allegiance to the military. The tribe members marched the streets of Port Sudan, chanting in support of the army leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, in his fight against the RSF. The protesters demanded armament to fight alongside the army, and the tribe had in the past blocked roads, even forced the Red Sea ports to close in protest at what they have said is the region's lack of political power and poor economic conditions there. The closures led to shortages of essential medicine, fuel, and wheat. Their protest is coming as Sudanese are now pinning their hopes on talks in Saudi Arabia between envoys of warring factions to end the bloodshed that has killed hundreds and triggered a mass exodus. Well, according to figures from the International Organization of Migration, more than 700,000 people have fled their homes in Sudan just to escape the fighting there between the rival military factions. It was not immediately clear if they were heading to Sudan's 7 international borders, over which at least 150 people have crossed, according to data coming from the UN Refugee Agency. The IOM spokesperson, Paul Dillon, told a press conference in Geneva that more than 700,000 people were now displaced within Sudan since the fighting began. And that's up from 340,000, which was reported last week.
The number of people internally displaced in Sudan has more than doubled in the last week, according to data that's been collected by the International Organization for Migration's Displacement Tracking Matrix. Now, more than 700,000 people are now internally displaced by the fighting, which began on the 15th of April, according to this latest data. Last Tuesday, the figure stood at 340,000. And of course, prior to the fighting, an estimated 3.7 million people were internally displaced in Sudan. Now, this latest report identifies increases in IDPs in multiple areas, in the White Nile, River Nile, Northern State, and Al Jazeera State, as well as parts of Khartoum State and the capital, where clashes are continuing. Many IDPs are sheltering with relatives, while others are gathering in schools, mosques, and public buildings, scenes that we see repeatedly over and over again around the world. Their intentions not yet clear. Of course, decisions that people are making to move are influenced by so many different factors. Events on the battlefield and the extent to which conflict is encroaching upon their communities are one. But of course, it's very difficult right now to find money. The ATMs aren't working. The banking system is not functioning. Fuel is difficult to come by and expensive. We've heard many reports of the costs of boarding interstate transport are increasing dramatically. So there are quite a number of factors at play here before we can make any determination about what the intentions are.
We're now being joined by VOA correspondent Mariama Diallo, who is online from the VOA Africa desk in Nairobi, Kenya, to give us more on this. Hello, Mariama. It's good to see you.
Hello, Anne. Thanks for having me again.
The U.S. is already talking about bringing Sudan back on track to civilian democratic rule. But I wonder, the words civilian and democratic have been used together. Do you think that the wording is deliberate?
Well, I believe that the talk has always been to bring the Sudanese people, the country of Sudan, back into civilian rule. I think that was the whole point of the revolution. That's the reason why Sudanese people went on the street for months and months and months, and to try to get rid of Omar al-Bashir. And of course, eventually the two generals, Hemedti and Al-Burhan, were part of what helped get rid of him. But I think even as negotiations went through and as negotiations went on, the whole point was always to bring it back to civilian rule. And I think we all know what happened when those negotiations were going on. The hiccups were about basically when it came to the timeline on basically when do you integrate the RSF forces into the Sudanese army. That's where the hiccup came, when the Sudanese army wanted 2 years, but the RSF wanted a longer transition period. So that basically got us to where why the war started. So basically it's been almost 3 weeks. It's been the situation, there's no question, dire, and just I don't even have to go into it, but we know that because of the escalation, President Biden obviously came out and talked about this and talked about the commitment of the United States, given basically what's happening is just a tragedy, and the commitment of the United States to basically help, get the Sudanese people back into civilian rule and democracy. And I think that's how it started. And we've seen Blinken also talk about it as well, talk about U.S. engagement with the Sudanese people with the same goal. He says that they are not giving up on that, which is, again, bringing it back to civilian rule. And as we speak, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, is actually testifying in Congress about the conflict, basically about options for an effective policy response on the Sudanese conflict. And she told Congress, as we're doing this right now, that she happened to talk to the negotiators that, who are present right now in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, the two factions, and the U.S. delegation that's there are saying basically they have, they're cautiously optimistic that they will get a ceasefire and that maybe negotiations will go on.
But the US actually thought that Sudan was really close to democracy when fighting erupted. What went wrong?
Well, I think not just the United States. I think maybe all the stakeholders who were involved in these negotiations between these two factions the past few months. When you talk about people, when you talk about to analysts in the region, negotiations were going forward. The stakeholders believe in it, and they thought that something positive will come out of it. But I also think that from talking to a lot of analysts, they also say that they could see something coming. There were a lot of tension, so I don't know, at this point. Even I'll give you an example. The UN Secretary General who visited Nairobi, I think it was last week, when he did a presser, somebody did ask him about something like, his response about the conflict was that he seemed like he was totally taken by surprise. So I think while some actors feel like they were taken by surprise about the conflict, other people do say that they saw it coming, there were tensions, but maybe I don't think anybody expected it to get to the scale that it got to today.
But Marima, would it have been better to involve some civilians in the transition to democracy before the war broke out?
Well, I think at this point, it's really, the civilians were the ones who got out there, who protested for months and months and months. And I think it's really a miss if you're going to decide, whatever the other countries of the world decide, to negotiate with the two generals and not involve the people of Sudan. And I think just yesterday, I was speaking to the director of the Africa program of the U.S. Institute of Peace, who said that in order for the country to move forward, you have to involve the civil society, you have to involve other political actors. But I think things have gotten so out of control at this point that the first thing they need is to kind of have a ceasefire, basically just stabilize things. But I think to move forward, to get Sudan into, to transition into civilian rule, to transition into a democracy, eventually you don't have a choice. So whether it was before or moving forward, they are a huge part of this, of what's happening, and they need to be involved. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much, Mariama Diallo, VOA correspondent from the African desk in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks always for your time on Network Africa.
Thank you, and for having me today.
Welcome back. You're still watching Network Africa on Channels Television. A coalition of opposition parties in Senegal is planning protest rallies over what it says is a move to block one of its leaders, Ousmane Sonko, from standing in presidential elections following his conviction in a defamation case. On Monday this week, appeal court increased Mr. Sonko's suspended prison sentence from 2 to 6 months for defaming tourism minister Mane Nantiago. He also is facing trial later this month for alleged rape and death threats over the complaint filed by an employee at a beauty salon. He claims the accusations are politically motivated. In 2021, the rape charge against him provoked riots against the current president, Macky Sall, which at least 12 people died in that incident. The Democratic Republic of Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi has accused the regional force deployed to the east of the country of not doing its job and colluding with M23 rebels. The East African force, known as the RSF, was deployed last year to help quell fighting and enforce a ceasefire. Mr. Tshisekedi said that he expected the East Africans to force the rebels to go into camps, warning that if they did not do so by the month of June, they will be asked to leave DR Congo. He also criticized the Kenyan authorities over the resignation and the replacement of the EACRF commander, Gen Jeff, over unspecified threats. The DR Congo president expressed these frustrations during a state visit to Botswana, and both countries are members of the regional bloc, the Southern African Development Community. And earlier this week, the community agreed to deploy troops to Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and an offensive mandate. Well, while that was going on, 2 babies were rescued alive after they were found near the shores of Lake Kivu just days after deadly floods in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Residents say that they were found floating on the debris of houses washed into the lake. They were rescued alive, and they say it's a miracle. They were all amazed. A community leader said the baby's parents had died in the floods, but he noted that the community is in touch with prospective foster parents. They were rescued on Monday in different areas, one in Bushushu, another in Nyamungbi, and most affected localities there in Kalehe. Mr. Birimbi also said that about 5,255 people are still missing and rescue activities are still ongoing. More than 400 people are known to have died in last week's floods. According to those in that community, 200 people were targeted and treated for injuries in local clinics following the floods, which were destroyed at least 1,300 homes and many schools, health facilities, churches, and much water infrastructure. The World Bank, supporting the integration of human resource training with research and outreach to address dryland agriculture in Africa, has collaborated with the Center for Dryland Agriculture at the Bayero University, Kano, to empower young people between the ages of 18 to 35. The event, which held at Bayero University in Kano, had the contestants in a team of 8 to pitch their agricultural business ideas before the judges. The winners will be giving a grant of 2 million naira to enhance their businesses, which is geared towards addressing unemployment and food security in the country.
Dryland Agriculture, Bayero University, Kano, with support from the World Bank, has brought together young people from the ages of 18 to 35 to a platform tagged Agri-Hacking 1.0 to pitch their agricultural business ideas for a grant of 2 million naira. The director of the Center for Dryland Agriculture, noted that the initiative of Agri-tech 1.0 will go a long way in impacting the lives of young entrepreneurs.
Over the years, we have made impact in so many areas, especially the normal training in terms of MSc, PhD, and short courses. We have done a lot of research work and so on. But we feel also there are a lot of young people with brilliant ideas that just need a little nudge for them to actualize their ideas into products, into services that will create wealth, not only for themselves, but for others. So we organize this agri-hiking to get together young people with brilliant ideas to see how we can support them with little seed money, but more importantly, with mentorship, with connections to other people that can support their businesses so that they can succeed.
A business expert says that the agricultural sector must begin to give more young people a chance to prefer lasting solutions to food security.
This program is one of those promises that this country has today to engage young people around agriculture and see how are we going to combine technology, the innovativeness of our young people, plus the massive resources that this country has, so that Nigeria can start producing real value out of agriculture.
The contestants are optimistic that the grant will improve their businesses.
With 38 coastal states and 6 island nations, Africa sits on immense ocean economic potential. The African Union estimates that the continent's blue economy currently generates nearly $300 billion, creating 49 million jobs. Experts, however, say that these figures could be much more if only challenges holding back the continent are tackled. Nigeria's Security Watch Africa Initiatives and the Center for Military Studies at the Stellenbosch University, South Africa, drew together members of the armed forces from both countries to look at the blue ocean economy and maritime security in Africa as it affects the continent's Agenda 2063. Nigeria's Chief of Naval, Vice Admiral Awal Gambo, who was earlier inducted in South Africa's National Defense College Wall of Fame, gave a keynote address at that symposium.
To the organizers, the symposium's goal was to explore various aspects of Africa's blue or ocean economy and the roles the navies of the continent can play, with other entities, of course, in ensuring security for starters.
The fundamental question, we've got many state actors, and some they group themselves, such as NATO. And the question to you as members of academia and practitioners, what is the NATO of Africa?
While the current approach to maritime security in Africa has been effective in reducing piracy, it is not sustainable. More efforts should be devoted to address the underlying causes of insecurity, such as depleted food stocks, poverty, youth unemployment, and environmental degradation. This necessitates immediate attention with emphasis on social and ecological well-being of our African people.
Ahead of a very interactive session, Nigeria's Chief of the Naval Staff, Vice Admiral Awal Gambo, gave the main presentation from a Nigerian perspective. He appealed for deeper collaboration between African states and agencies, with much more emphasis on research and development, as well as resource deployment for such.
All we need to do is collectively, united, indivisibly, synergize. Permit me to share a quotation by Sir Walter Raleigh. I always refer to him. Whoever commands the sea commands the trade. Whoever commands the trade of the world commands the riches of the world.
There were many words on marble during the interactive session, highlighting the importance of the knowledge of the continent's ocean resources, patrolling governed and ungoverned spaces, and information sharing post-research, the role of national interests in combating crime, the issue of interagency rivalry, among other challenges.
If we have the common understanding of what
maritime security is, within the context of the blue economy, as to warrant us to have marine special planning administrators to govern that space solely for the purpose of economic and sustainable development, then we will be able to achieve much better.
We must make our R&D to also believe that there are resources that can promote the blue economy within the internal waterways and maritime environment, not just the ocean ways, because we've so far been talking more on the waterways.
Another thing that hasn't been really mentioned so far is the environmental challenges. With all maritime crime and with the interdiction and the enforcement, you have the threat of damage to the environment.
And that's Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.